Welcome in, everyone, to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It's Tuesday, October 14th, and we got a whole lot to get to. We're starting to do this tomorrow or yesterday, but got the news that came across with James Franklin. Wanted to make sure that I got my full thoughts out for that. So we are recording this right now, and let's go ahead and jump into this. We have some major headlines coming out of Week 7, and we'll start where you expected us to start, over there in State College, Pennsylvania. James Franklin has been fired. He has been let go by Penn State after, I believe, about 13 years at Penn State. Had done an incredible job in a lot of different ways. I believe it was 104-46 when he officially got let go. They obviously lose to Northwestern this weekend on homecoming at home. It went wrong. It went wrong in a hurry. I mean, 17 days ago, he was ahead against Oregon in overtime. They were up by 7 points. It looked like they had a shot to make it happen, and it all kind of fell apart. This is 11 years that James Franklin has been at Penn State, and the biggest thing here is I don't think this is crazy. Now, there's a lot of hurdles to get over, and we will get to that in time. There's no doubt about that. We'll jump into that as it kind of goes on, but I think this makes sense. I think he lost just about everyone you could possibly lose. I think the fans were not really in on it, especially after this past weekend. It seemed like a lot of the players weren't quite as bought in as you want them to be to the coach that they're playing for. I think it all went wrong, and I think it went wrong in a hurry. And I think Penn State saw an opening to do this, and they took it. The biggest thing here to remember is James Franklin's a really good coach. Now, is he a great coach? Is he an elite coach? Probably not. He hasn't quite shown that he can get over that hump, win those big games that Kalen DeBoer is winning right now. A Steve Sarkisian has been able to win at times, but maybe not as consistently as he would like. I think the reality is you're 11 years into this thing, and in 2016, you get the win over Ohio State. You win the Big Ten. Everything is moving in the right direction. And then you kind of go back to normal, and nothing really happens for the next little bit. You don't quite get off the ground. You get to the playoff last year, but you play two teams that you probably should have beat, no matter what. And I get that's a little bit unfair, but it's still the reality of the situation. You look back at the postseason last year, and you're thinking, we beat SMU and Boise State. That's really good. That's great that you got 2 wins in the playoff when you hadn't gotten any prior, but it's not quite good enough. It's not quite where you want to be. It's not quite the teams that you want to be beating and the ones you want to be competing with. You're really close. You were really close, I should say. At the end of the day, you're missing the mark just by a little bit, and I think you lost what you need in this era of college football, which is the buy-in of the fan base. If you don't have that, you're not going to get the money, you're not going to get the donorship, you're not going to get the buy-in that you need from your program going forward. I think this was a decision that probably had to be made. I'm a little shocked it was made this early, and I'm a little shocked it was made in the middle of the season, but that's where you are right now. The biggest thing here is it is about $48 million at the very lowest. 48, 49, maybe 56, somewhere in that realm of things is what this buyout is going to be. How does that affect who they can offer? How does that affect what they can do in this coaching search? Because the reality of the matter is that does handcuff you a little bit. Now, Penn State should be a little bit better off than some other schools. It sounds like the new deal with Adidas is going to pay for quite a bit of this. Now, there's some reports that Adidas made this happen. That's not the case. That's been disputed by a number of people within that program, so I don't think that's what happened. I do think the money from Adidas made this a little bit easier to pull the trigger in the middle of the season. But overall, this is a good job. This is a job that you can do incredible things at. You can win a national title. You can do incredible things going forward at. I don't think it's an elite job. And I think when you look around the country, I think Florida is going to come open here pretty soon once Florida gets into the bye week, regardless of what happens this weekend against Mississippi State. I think Auburn's going to come open a little bit later in the season because we kind of feel what's going on around there and with Hugh Freeze. I think you're sitting below the Florida job and right on even sitting with the Auburn job. And that might sound a little crazy to Penn State fans, and I don't mean that as disrespectful. I think it's a good idea to get into this thing as early as possible because I don't think you're going to be playing the same game. And frankly, I think there's another job in Ann Arbor, Michigan that could open later in the season, and you're definitely not winning over that one. I'm just telling you right now. So we don't really know what this is going to look like. We don't know who they're going to hire, how much money they have to hire him. It sounds like they have enough to make it all happen. Do they have enough to pay the $56 million, give the new head coach and his new staff all new contracts, and then pay $25 million for a roster? Because that's what it requires to compete in the Big Ten going forward, $20 to $25 million every single year. Does Penn State have roughly $100 million to play around with over the next 12 months? Because They better. That's the reality of this situation. I tend to believe they do. I just tend to believe they might be in a little bit more of a corner than some people expect. Now, some of the names that keep popping up, the big one is Matt Rule, the head coach of Nebraska, has done a really good job there. Now, some Penn State fans are bringing up the top 10 rank wins, and I think there's some validity to that. I think it would be better at Penn State. I think you'd have more buy-in. I think you'd have more ability to maybe turn the keys that need to be turned. I think he's a great head coach. There's a couple of names that I would pick, if I'm being totally honest. One of them is in Ames, Iowa. Ames, Iowa, excuse me. Matt Campbell. I think he's really, really good at what he does. Now, I think his teams aren't quite as talented as what you would have at Penn State. I think he doesn't have the buy-in that he would have at Penn State. I think he's losing games partly because of that. I think he's a good enough coach to coach on the highest level. I think he's a good enough coach to win a national title. I think Matt Campbell will be a slam dunk hire, and I think you'd be able to do it for just a little bit less than a Kurt Cignetti or a Matt Rule going forward. The other name, Eli Drinkwitz. If you can get him away from Missouri, I'd do it in a heartbeat. That guy is aggressive. That guy is intense, kind of like Kurt Cignetti, where it doesn't hit you over the head. It's not obvious when he walks onto the field, but that guy's really intense. That guy is fiery. That guy's exactly what you need to beat an Ohio State, to beat a Michigan, to do the things that Penn State have been struggling to do over the last couple of years. So I think those are a couple of names. I think Matt Campbell, I think Eli Drinkwitz. If you can do that for a reasonable amount of money and pull them away from the situation they're in, I think Campbell's going to be a little bit easier than Drinkwitz in that case. But at the end of the day, you get one of those guys, I feel pretty confident you can turn this thing into something good. How quickly that happens is still up for debate. We'll see how that develops over the next 12 months or so. But at the end of the day, I think Matt Campbell, I think Eli Drinkwitz is probably where you start. Now, Matt Rule would be a great hire. He'd probably bring Dylan Raiola over with him. Eli Drinkwitz would probably bring Bo Pribla. So that would be an interesting thing to watch, him kind of just returning to State College. But overall, there's a lot of different things that you're going to have to handle if you're Penn State going forward. There's a lot of different things that you're going to have to weigh. And at the end of it, you're kind of throwing a dart at the dartboard. It's not to say that you don't have a number of great options and a number of guys that I would feel very confident in moving forward. Not every guy is going to win 11, 12, and 13 games in 3 years. That's exactly what James Franklin did the last 3 years. Now, did he win the games that he was wanting to, or the fan base was wanting to, or he was quote-unquote meant to? No, and that's the big difference here. But the reality of the matter is, you never know what's going to happen. You are in the wilderness at this very moment. You just got to hope you find your way out to the right guy, because there's a number of different realities here where you don't get a guy as good as James Franklin, because James Franklin's a really good head coach. Now, is he a top 10, top 5 coach in the country? I think that's up for debate. But the reality of the matter is, not a lot of coaches fit into that realm. Not a lot of coaches fit into that realm consistently, especially in this world of college football, and we'll talk about that here in a second as well. But overall, I think there's a number of different names you can go after. If you want to go a little bit lower on the rung, which I think could be really interesting as well, you can go OCs all along the Big Ten. Will Stein of Oregon, Brian Hartline of Ohio State, Mike Shanahan of Indiana. Those would be a little bit weirder, but definitely more affordable. Really smart individuals know exactly what they want to do offensively, and Will Stein, Brian Hartline, Mike Shanahan, they know exactly what they want to do from a talent acquisition standpoint. So that's the other part of this. I think there's a number of options you can go out and get. There's a number of guys that are going to do incredible things for this program. Before we get out of here, I think it's important to say James Franklin's a really good man. I think that's something that kind of gets lost in this, because he has struggled in the last couple of years. I think there is a lot of criticism that is totally warranted, that is thrown his way. I think the reality of the matter is everyone at Penn State wanted him to be the guy. They wanted him to be the one that took them out of the sanctions era after Bill O'Brien went off to the Texans and got them more out of the scholarship restrictions and the postseason ban, and found his way to the top of the mountaintop. I really believe that. I really believe everyone around there wanted it to be James Franklin, including the fans, including the players, and it just didn't come together. And I think that dude has done incredible things for that program if he ends up being the Mark Richt of Penn State football, which has been talked about quite a bit. And I have some questions about that, because the vast majority of the time you don't find your Kirby Smart after your Mark Richt. You tend to find someone a whole lot worse. But at the end of the day, if that's the case, he'll be looked back on very fondly. The same way that Georgia fans look back on Mark Richt incredibly fondly, because he did miss the mark. He didn't quite hit the massive threshold that you want to hit as a football coach. But he set up this program to be really successful moving forward. I do think if Matt Rule gets hired, I think it's a good one. I think it's a good hire. I think it puts you in a position to compete going forward. I don't think it's the best hire you can make, and I don't think it's the cheapest hire you can make, which might be a bigger thing here. But at the end of the day, I think overall, I think there's a lot of things to take away from this. I think the biggest thing of the bunch is James Franklin did a lot of good at Penn State, and he set up whoever the next coach is going to be in a whole lot better of a spot than he was taking over this program at. So there's a lot of things to be said. There's a lot of different names that will be brought up, and we'll figure that out over the next probably 6 weeks as they figure out going to the end of the season. But at the end of the day, I think there's a couple of names that I would circle. For me, it's Matt Campbell and it's Eli Drinkwitz. For other people, it's Matt Rule. So whoever it is, Penn State's got to hope it works, because if it doesn't, there's going to be another story where you fired a really good head coach to get a guy that takes you just one step back and you're winning 8 or 9 games a year, not 10 or 11. Very much up in the air. We will see what happens, but James Franklin officially out at Penn State much earlier in this season than I think anyone would thought. A lot of people thought he was going to be raising the national trophy, and he will not get close to that. So a lot of different things happening. We'll obviously update you as it unfolds, but a lot of interesting things in the coaching carousel. It is not stopping anytime soon is the other part of that. Now we got to get to the games. Indiana wins 30-20 over Oregon. This is the most impressive performance of the weekend, maybe the most impressive performance of the year, in my opinion. What they did in this game is outright incredible, and it's something that not a lot of teams do to Oregon. Even the Ohio States of the world don't do to Oregon all that often. Now, Ohio State was able to do it in the Rose Bowl, of course, but at the end of the day, Oregon has dudes across every single position that are going to play NFL football at some level, and they're going to play NFL football in every single position room in that entire team. Indiana handed it to them for 60 minutes. It was not even close. Well, it was close. I shouldn't say that. But at the end of the day, from a physicality standpoint, Indiana won this one from tip to tail. Roman Hemby was incredible, had 70 yards, 2 scores on the ground. Fernando Mendoza did have the INT where you're falling off your back foot and just trying to make a play, probably forcing it just a little bit there, but Oregon takes that back to the house. And then he just leads them on a 12-play drive, 75 yards for a touchdown. And Elijah Surratt caps it off with his touchdown. Incredible. It's an incredible feat from a team that, frankly, was probably getting out-athleted here, was probably getting out-talented. They don't care. They're not a team that is going to care moving forward when they play Ohio State. They're going to get out-talented. They're going to get, quote-unquote, athleted. They don't care. They're really good athletes in their own right now, and they might be a step behind some of these teams. They're not too far behind, especially compared to last year. They are not far behind. This is an elite group. They have dudes up front that are going to be absolutely nasty and play in the NFL for a very long time on both sides of the ball. Indiana rolled this Oregon offensive line, a group that had been really good going up to this game, and looking back, I think there's some tests that you look back and you think, was that as tough as we once thought? But at the end of the day, Aiden Fisher was the best player on the football field by a pretty good margin. Elijah Surratt was really good on Saturday. So they got 6 sacks, they got 8 tackles for loss. The pass rush was downright incredible. Brian Haynes coached the best game of football that anyone did this entire weekend, and Steve Sarkisian called a really good game down there in Dallas. Brian Haynes did an incredible job this weekend, did such a good job with simulated pressures, getting Dante Moore overthinking it, because I was listening to Brooks Austin, I should say, and Dante Moore was just guessing. His eyes were not in the right spot. There were some answers at times, and he was not finding it. That's Brian Haynes. That's this Indiana defense just getting after him, making him overthink things, and he's a young quarterback. If you can get him to put his eyes down, take his eyes down from the field just a little bit too long, you're going to have him. There's no doubt about that. So the biggest thing about this team, and it's something that a lot of people have said, is college football teams take on the personality of their coach. That's the reality of the situation. Kirby Smart, those Georgia teams, they're a little bit fiery. They're a little bit intense in a lot of different ways, and we'll talk about that game in a little bit. But at the end of the day, Curt Cignetti is quietly confident, and he's really confident. He always has a chip on his shoulder. He always has a little bit of aggression. He's always willing to talk just a smattering of crap, not necessarily super aggressive, but enough to get a little juice out of his team. That team's incredible, and not enough can be said about the coaching job that has been done there, about the guys that they brought in this offseason with Fernando Mendoza and Pat Coogan and all of these incredible players that have done incredible things for this team. The 2 best players on this team came from JMU with Curt Cignetti. Aiden Fisher and Elijah Surratt are absolute difference makers for this football team, and a lot of people didn't know their name about 24 months ago. These are incredible players, and these are guys that Curt Cignetti trusts and he believes in, and he has done an incredible job with this football team. It can't be said enough. They've made mistakes in this game. They're as mentally tough as any team in the country, and they are darn talented as well. So I'm not writing off Indiana by any means. I'll release my top 25 later today, maybe tomorrow, and I'll get into it. They're probably sitting somewhere around 2 or 3, if I'm being totally honest. But Oregon, I think, will be fine. This is a very good football team. The schedule sets up really nicely to where you get USC and Washington. You win one of those games, you're probably in pretty good shape to move forward. Now, Indiana just gave the blueprint to USC and Washington. Can they do the things defensively that Indiana can do? Probably not, but I do think there's an opening there where Oregon's got to be a little bit careful. I think they're still a CFP team, but definitely can go a little bit awry the rest of the season. Indiana keeps rolling with very few stones in their path. I think they get Maryland later in the season. I believe they get Iowa, if I'm not mistaken. At the end of the day, that should be the team you see in Indianapolis, probably across from Ohio State, but we'll see how it develops the rest of the year. Alabama gets a win on the road at Missouri, 27-24. This is a 3-point win. I think Alabama won by a little bit more than this, at least on the field. It's not to say Missouri played a bad game, but Alabama felt pretty much in control for the vast majority of this football game. And I think the big thing here is Alabama's playing good enough to win a title, plain and simple. Are they at the level right now that Ohio State, Miami, Indiana are? I tend to not believe so, but when you have that quarterback playing that level of football, you can do anything. You can do a number of different things this year, and Ty Simpson is playing, in my opinion, at a higher level than any quarterback in the entire country. I think he's playing absolutely elite football. I think right now he'd probably be my pick for the Heisman. Now, I think Julian Sayin would have a lot to say about that. I think a number of players would have a lot to say that, including the guy Ahmad Hardy on the other side of the football here. But the throw on 4th and 9 to Lottie Brooks is incredible. It's absolutely eye-popping. There were 5 or 6 throws in this football game where you're thinking, I don't know how you put it better. I don't know how you place it better. I don't know how you move your feet better. I don't know how you manage the pocket better. The dude's a professional player. He's a professional quarterback that happens to be wearing an Alabama jersey right this second. He's incredible. He's going to go in the first round at the end of the year. Just got to keep playing consistent. Really, really good football player. The Missouri run game didn't get going, but I felt like they abandoned it a little bit early. Like this game, Alabama was in relative control. They were up by 10 points or 7 points for most of the football game, but it was never fully out of reach, and it felt like Missouri kind of leaned away from the run and put too much on Bo Pribble's shoulders late in this football game, and he made a couple of mistakes. Now, Damon Wilson, Zion Young on the other side of the football for Missouri are absolute problems, and they're guys that can absolutely get you back on track, get you to the CFP, and hopefully get Bo Pribble just a little bit further down the road without having to do too much. Now, they still get Vanderbilt, they still get A&M, they still get some really tough games. If those two guys can take over and Damon Wilson and Zion Young and that run game can at least get moving and stick to their guns throughout the football game, this still very well could be a CFP team. There's no doubt in my mind. They have a schedule that sets up pretty nicely. They could definitely do some really dangerous things this year. This is just one of those games that you came out on the wrong side of an elite quarterback. And that's kind of what happened to Georgia earlier in the season when they faced Alabama. It was just Ty Simpson playing at a ridiculously high level, and there wasn't much to be done on the defensive side of the ball, at least consistently, to stop this unit. LT Overton was the best football player on the field, and he was the Bama defensive end, totally took the Missouri run game out of it. And now I think they probably should have tested him just a little bit more, but he was dominating that game for all afternoon, and it was an absolute difference in this football game. Made Missouri a little bit more nervous to run the football late in this game, and that's the difference in this one. But Alabama's in great shape. They get Tennessee this upcoming weekend. If they win that one, they're off to the races. They are the team that's probably setting the pace in the SEC, except maybe one other team over there in College Station. But at the end of the day, Missouri goes to Auburn, a pissed-off Tigers team. That'll be something to watch. Definitely got to get through that if they want to keep that CFP hopes on the horizon. But going to be really interesting what happens going forward with these teams. I think both of them could be in the CFP. I think Missouri's a little bit more susceptible because of the quarterback play to fall out of it, but I think they have a lot of talent on these two football teams. I think if Ty Simpson plays at that level, you're probably going to see Alabama in the playoff, and you're probably going to see him playing for a national title. As good as that kid has been, it's been an incredible thing to watch, and I think those two teams, Alabama and Indiana, really put on shows this weekend and proved quite a bit to me. Mainly Indiana was an incredible performance from Curt Cignetti's boys, and I think they're going to be a team that might be right in the mix for a national title by the end of the year. A lot of more work to do, but they just got a huge win, the first one that really kind of defines the Curt Cignetti era, and I don't think it's slowing down anytime soon. But let's take our first break here. When we come back, we got some statement wins. Texas wins Red River. USC just rolls over Michigan. Georgia wins a controversial one against Auburn, and a number of other things right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the major storylines of the weekend. We had James Franklin get fired from Penn State, a weird time over there in State College, and a lot of things to figure out, both financially and just do you make the right hire going forward. Indiana put on the performance of the weekend. Alabama gets a huge win on the road, and a number of other things coming right now. We have a number of statement wins from this past weekend that we just got to get into. And the first one, we're going to start down there in Dallas. Texas beats Oklahoma 23-6 in Red River. This is one that Texas needed really, really badly. There were two teams this weekend that needed to get off the mat and get a massive win. One went down to Dallas and beat their bitter rival, who was ranked number 6 in the country. The other one lost to Northwestern and fired their head coach. So two different directions in this game, in this weekend for Texas and Penn State, but Texas dominated the second half, outscoring Oklahoma 20-0, outgaining them 188-68, including a punt return from Ryan Niblett that totally changed this one with maybe a few questionable blocks. I'll leave it at that for the time being because no changing it at this point, but definitely one that he might have gotten a little bit of help on. But Arch Manning looked the part. He looked better than he has all the entire year. A lot of that was the game plan from Steve Sarkisian. Got the ball out of his hands very quickly. Didn't allow the O-line to do what the O-line did the week before. Now, they gave up only one sack. Did struggle at times. Definitely, Arch Manning had to make some plays off schedule, and he did a great job of that. Something they're going to have to continue to improve on is that offensive line. The run game really got going in the second half, which is a huge thing if they can keep that going for Texas moving forward. But really good game plan from Steve Sarkisian was executed nearly flawlessly from Arch Manning. I think it's exactly what the Texas offense needed, but Trey Wisner was the best player on the football field. Arch Manning was great. Trey Wisner was everything. He went for over 100 total yards, 27 touches on the day, and he did something that not a lot of Texas players have done this year. He made guys miss. There were not a lot of guys, and frankly, the wide receivers didn't really do it in this game. It's really hard to make Oklahoma players miss, but at the end of the day, Trey Wisner ran through tackles. He made a couple of guys miss on some huge catches. He was the guy that totally ignited this Texas offense and gave them enough to win this game. It was never going to be pretty against the Oklahoma defense. It rarely is, but at the end of the day, they were able to figure this thing out. If that's the Texas that we get in the second half going forward, if the second half that we saw from Texas is what we get going forward, that team can make the CFP. Now, they're walking a tightrope. There's no doubt about that. Could they make it at 9-3? I think is a little bit up for debate, and we'll see how that develops throughout the rest of the season. But at the end of the day, they get Kentucky this weekend in Lexington, which is always a little bit more sketchy than it should be. Mississippi State in Starkville, and then Vanderbilt at home. They win those three games, go into the bye week at 7-2. Then they get Georgia, Arkansas, and A&M at the end. You go 2-1 in those, you might be in good shape. You go 3-0, you're definitely in the CFP. So a lot's still on the table for Texas. Now, a lot still have to be done, and a lot better football that needs to be played going forward. You need to continue to kind of develop this offense, continue to press the right buttons in that defense, just continue to be that defense. But overall, a massive win for them. For John Mateer, he was all over the place in this game. I think he's going to be fine. He was very hurt. It was very obvious. He was bleeding kind of all over the place throughout that football game. I don't think it's all that crazy. The Texas defense is a nightmare to deal with already. When you're worrying about your hand the entire time, it doesn't get a whole lot better. So I don't think it's all that worrisome. I think Oklahoma's in good shape now. It's a really tough schedule the rest of the way. So they could very well miss the CFP and still be playing really good football, but I think those fans really want a CFP berth. So we'll see what happens the rest of the way. They get South Carolina this weekend in Columbia, so got to make it through that one. If you do, then it's a really tough end of the season, but absolutely could still be a CFP team at the end of it. Texas just owned the day, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and then Arch Manning made enough plays at the end of this one and gave a little bit of wave to the Sooner fans as they walked out. But an incredible game from Texas, one they badly needed. And now they move forward, just having to continue that clip. If they can get to the bye week at 7-2, a lot still on the table for the Texas Longhorns. Michigan loses in in dominating fashion, I should say. USC beats Michigan 31-13. This is the one that Lincoln Riley's been waiting on. Now, the real one he's been waiting on comes this weekend, and we'll talk about that in a second. But at the end of the day, they physically dominated the team that has defined physicality in the Big 12 in the Big 10 over the last couple of years. Michigan has been the team. When you think about physicality in that conference, you think about the Michigan Wolverines, then you think about Ohio State, then you think about Penn State. No longer the case for very obvious reasons. USC dominated this game. The story of the game is walk-on King Miller. Went for 18 carries, 158 yards, 1 touchdown. Sounds like their top 2 guys are going to be out this upcoming weekend for Notre Dame. So he's going to have to make a lot of plays. There's no doubt about that. A lot of pressure on that kid's shoulders. But it's a really special thing to watch. We'll see what happens going on with that. But Michigan lost Justice Haynes. That's a huge thing here. Definitely something that it sounds like he's going to be back this weekend, but without him at 100%, this offense is definitely a little bit hampered and is definitely a little bit hamstrung, and I think it's going to really hurt them moving forward if Justice Haynes cannot get back on the field. But this is going to be a really interesting thing to watch. I think this could be one that Michigan really wants back. I don't think they're necessarily going to spiral. I don't think it's going to be terrible, but they get Washington this upcoming weekend. They lose that one, then it's pretty much, do you win the Ohio State game or not? And that's obviously one that they've been pretty good at the last couple of years, but we'll see what happens the rest of the season. I think Michigan's still in it. I think this could be the one that ends up keeping them out of the CFP when it's all said and done. But has a doable schedule. We'll see what happens there. USC gets Notre Dame this weekend. That's the one. If they find a way to win that football game, then they are firmly in the mix for the CFP moving forward. If they beat Nebraska the week after that, then they might be the absolute favorite right behind Ohio State and Indiana to get in from the Big Ten. So an incredible performance from a team that had kind of been waiting for this moment, had been waiting for the one where they get to run the football all the time, they get to dominate physically, and they were able to do that. A bigger test this weekend against Notre Dame. If they pass that one, then you could very well see USC in the CFP for the very first time in college football history. It would be a little bit wild, but absolutely a team that has playing really, really good football. Just got to overcome some injuries and find your way to the end of the road. Georgia wins a game 20-10. This is a tough one to talk about for a number of reasons. I think the biggest one is the refereeing in the sport is so uniquely bad. It can't even be described. And the thing about this sport is it's very rich. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of people that would be more than happy to help this get fixed. There would be a lot of money that could be poured into this thing that is not being poured in right now. There's a lot of people that would be really qualified to do this that are not doing it right now. I don't know what we're doing. And I want to say this very, very clearly. It was a fumble when he was going in for the touchdown. I feel very confident in that. Actually, anyone who tells you they feel 100% confident that it was a fumble or a touchdown, they're lying to you. It was very much up for debate. Whatever was called on the field was going to be called at the end of the day. It was called a fumble. It was going to be called a fumble. If it was called a touchdown on the field, it was probably going to end up being a touchdown. That being said, I don't understand how it ends up being Georgia on the 1-yard line. For the life of me, I don't get how that happened. Now, if you're a Georgia fan, I don't think you're really being too mad about that, but at the end of the day, Kyron Jones recovers the ball and runs the other direction for a touchdown. I don't know if it should have been a touchdown. I'm just saying, how does it end up being Georgia on the 1-yard line? I don't get that by any means. That's the weirdest thing in the world to me. The other part of it, Kirby Smart called a timeout. That's plain and simple and very obvious to anyone that has eyes is probably the best way to put it. He was very obviously calling a timeout. There is no argument in the other direction. Him lying in the postgame is something I'm not nearly as mad about as a lot of people I seem to find. Why would he tell them that they made a mistake? What would he have to benefit from telling him that they made a mistake in that moment? They were giving him another timeout in a close game on the road. I'm taking it and running with it. I don't really care if I have to fib a little bit at the postgame to get that timeout. I'm taking the timeout. He was absolutely calling a timeout in that moment. I do think he was telling the refs that Auburn was clapping for a delay a game during the timeout. I have no earthly idea why the ref took it away from him. It should have been a delay a game or a timeout. They messed that up. A lot of energy is being put on Kirby Smart's shoulders for all of this when the energy should be put on the people that are actually making the calls, the people that are not doing their job very effectively right at this moment because they totally lost control of this game and never got it back. It was absolutely terrible from pretty much the 2-minute warning on. It was an absolute nightmare in this football game and the refs were totally in over their head from start to finish. So all of that can be said. The refs were terrible in this football game. A lot of the calls went in Georgia's direction instead of Auburn's. All of that can be said while still saying the refs didn't take this one from Auburn. Auburn gained 15 yards total after that fumble. I'm sorry, you can't look at me in the face and say that's not Hugh Freeze and Auburn's fault. You just can't. You can't tell me that a team went into halftime, still up 7 points, and came out with that performance in the second half, and it's not their fault. I'm sorry. There's a number of things you can push on the ref's shoulders, and we should push on the ref's shoulders for the incredible amounts of poor calls that they make per week. The reality of the matter is, an elite team, a good team, finds a way to get up and finds a way to put together good drives after the half, especially what they were doing in the first half was working so incredibly well. They didn't do that. They fell short in the second half. They fell flat after that very moment with that fumble. That entire team folded. That's the reality of that situation. Auburn fans are really mad at the refs, and I totally get that. You should be in a lot of cases. You should be a whole lot more mad at your head coach, and that's just the reality of that situation. I think that's kind of coming around the fan base as I've seen the last couple of days. I think a lot of people are starting to understand that maybe the problem is with the headset on, but at the end of the day, this is one of those games where one team responded to the craziness and one team didn't. That's the reality of the situation. Yes, Georgia got a couple of calls that went their direction. I think one of them was not nearly as egregious as people are making it out to be, but at the end of the day, the Georgia team was mentally tough. The Auburn team was not. And I think that's the difference in this football game. As lame as that might sound to some Auburn fans, I think that's the truth. And Gunnar Stockton, I love watching this kid play. He is far from perfect. He is far from the best athlete. He has far from the best arm in the world. He finds a way to get a win. He is more than willing to strap up his chin strap and say, this might be the last time that I do this, because this dude fights for every single yard that he gets, and he makes every single play that he has to make. Diving into the end zone might have been a little bit wrong, and I think Kirby Smart let him know about that, but at the end of the day, if I see that opening, I'm taking it, and also you got that shot out of it, so I think it's pretty cool at the end of the day, but Georgia heads into a huge one with Ole Miss this weekend. Auburn gets Missouri this weekend. Both of them are in a position where Auburn is in a position where if they don't get this win, I think Hugh Freeze is probably fired by Sunday. If I'm being totally honest, for Georgia, I think you got to get this win. Ole Miss coming off a game where they did not look the part by any means, and you're heading into a season where you still have Florida, you still have Texas later in the season, you still have Georgia Tech at the end of the season. You got to be careful. You got to find a way to get the win this weekend in Sanford, and it's a team that beat you last year. So a lot on the table for these two teams. This was a terribly, terribly officiated game, and the officials didn't take this game from Auburn because if you gain 15 yards after the halftime, I don't really have a lot of sympathy for you. But let's get into the next game here. Another 20-10 result. LSU beat South Carolina 20-10. They were able to get the win here, and it was a good win. I shouldn't say it looks like a good win. It was a good win. It was a win where they handled their business, they did what they're meant to, and Garrett Nussmeier looked a little bit healthier, which is a massive thing for this football team. Still a couple of decisions where you're thinking, what are you doing, Garrett? I understand the arm talent is ridiculous, but let's calm down just a little bit. But at the end of the day, really talented kid, finally slowly getting healthy. If that's the difference, if he gets healthy at the right time, this defense is going to give them a chance to win every single game that they play, and that kid's going to make enough plays. He's going to do some really incredible things the rest of the season if he's healthy, and I think that's really up for debate. The rest of the season, especially when you got to face an Alabama here pretty soon, you're going to get hit pretty hard in that football game. So we'll see what happens with that the rest of the way. I'm having trouble fully buying into LSU. I was in the preseason, felt great about this team. Now I'm a little bit worried. They get Vanderbilt, A&M, and Alabama next. Huge games. If they find a way to win 2 out of 3, let's say, they're in really good shape moving forward. If they find a way to win all 3, watch out for LSU. They're moving forward with a lot of confidence, and I think if Garrett Nussmeier is healthy, they have the ability to win all 3 of those games. They have the ability to kind of vault themselves up to the top of the SEC and maybe be a national championship contender by the end of the year. A lot has to come together. I should say that, obviously, but at the end of the day, I think this LSU team has a really, really high ceiling. I think they're really, really far from reaching that. So we'll see what happens the rest of the way. South Carolina, I think you're the team in the SEC that was the sacrificial lamb this year, and that stinks. You got Lenore Sellers hurt early in that Vanderbilt game, and nothing's really been the same since. It was always going to go rough for one of the teams in the SEC this year. I tended to believe it was going to be South Carolina, and there we are. It was not going to be pretty this year, and I can't promise that 2026 is going to be better. I'll be totally honest. Now, what happens with Lenora Sellers will have a lot to do with that, but we'll see what happens the rest of the way. South Carolina is still a very dangerous team that could very well take down Oklahoma this weekend and totally turn the Sooners season on its head. BYU gets an overtime win over Arizona. They needed this one really badly. There's a couple of games coming up for BYU that if they didn't win this game, they could absolutely knock them out of the Big 12 championship. They were able to get it done. I think Bear Bachmeier needed this game. As weird as that sounds, he had 2 INTs on the road, and he found a way to get it done. His legs were huge in this game, went for, I believe, 78 on the ground, a couple of scores, really talented kid. And it's a kid that went on the road, had a tough performance, maybe one of his worst of his career, and he found a way to get the job done. And that's a huge credit to BYU and what they've been able to build over there. It's also a huge credit to Bear Bachmeier and being mentally tough enough to go into a tough environment and at the very least find a way to get through a tough performance with a win. But BYU gets the Holy War this weekend against Utah. It's one they probably need. They get Iowa State, Texas Tech, and Cincinnati still on the way. With how tough the Big 12 is going to be the rest of the way, I can't imagine they're going to be able to get through that unscathed. So probably need to beat Utah this weekend. It's going to be really interesting to watch that one. Arizona likely out of the Big 12 race, but they're a really dangerous team. With Noah Fafita playing good football, you have Houston, Colorado, Cincinnati, and Arizona State still ahead. They can knock one of those teams, especially Cincinnati or Arizona State, out of the Big 12 title if they get to that point and are still playing really good football over there. Arizona State got rolled, and it was one of those things that the second you saw Sam Levin's news, you probably knew this was going to happen. Maybe not this aggressive, but when you don't have your starting quarterback, a lot goes wrong in a hurry, especially for Arizona State. Love Jeff Sims. You can't call nearly the offense that you can call with Sam Levitt with Jeff Sims. So at the end of the day, Utah was able to get the win. Dan Pierce's running ability is huge for this football team. That's something BYU is going to be watching. So might want to get a little bit more creative if you're Utah, but it handled the job on this Saturday. They get BYU this weekend, Colorado and Cincinnati right after. They absolutely could get back to the Big 12 title and hopefully set up a rematch with the team that beat them earlier in the season in Texas Tech. For Arizona State, still very much alive. You got to beat Texas Tech this weekend. I think everyone understands that. I think that's the reason that Sam Levitt did not play in that football game. I think he probably could have if he absolutely had to. But if they can win that one, everything's on the table, and they could totally change what the Big 12 is and what Texas Tech season is going forward. But at the end of the day, a huge win for Utah, one that they badly needed and one that Arizona State can come back from, but probably are walking a little bit of a tightrope, especially going into a massive game this weekend against Texas Tech. But a lot of really fun games. I think the biggest one to me was probably Texas. I think you look at that team going into this weekend, you're thinking, are they about to go 3-3 and maybe go 7-5 this year, where they lose to Oklahoma, they lose to Georgia, they lose to A&M? That wasn't all that crazy. That wasn't off the table by any means. And now they move forward, and there's a lot of optimism. Now, a lot of things to figure out over there in Austin still, a lot of things that they need to continue to improve on, but that's a team that can win a lot of football games. That's a team that can beat an A&M team later in the season. Probably got to continue to improve, but at the end of the day, a lot of optimism where there just wasn't any last week around Austin, but we'll get into that as it unfolds, of course. Let's take another break here. When we come back, let's just get to all the rest of the games. We got South Florida just rolling over North Texas, Ohio State, just being Ohio State. Ole Miss really struggling with Washington State. Texas A&M handled Florida and a number of other games right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about a lot of the statement wins from this past weekend. Texas wins Red River. USC rolls over Michigan into the Notre Dame game. We had Georgia winning a weird one against Auburn, and I'll leave it at that for the time being. But let's go ahead and get into the final segment here. A little bit of a whip around, a number of games that we have to talk about really quickly here, and let's start with the biggest one in the group of 5 this past weekend. South Florida I put the scores in the wrong place. I apologize to South Florida. South Florida dominates North Texas 63-36. An incredible performance from South Florida. One of those teams that's going to be really, really hard to stop. If that offense gets going the way that they did in this football game, it's going to be a nightmare. They were tied in this game, and they were down 3. They were -3 in the turnover category, is the way I should put that. So at the end of the day, they were dominating this game from start to finish. It might not look like that on the when you look at the breakdown of the game. They were controlling this one from start to finish. North Texas is a good team. It's still a very young quarterback and it's still a very porous defense. As of right now, it'll be interesting to see if they can get back into this thing, maybe make it to the American title in a rematch, but a doable schedule, still a team that I worry just a little bit. Youth of the quarterback, youth of the defense, definitely a question mark there, but South Florida continues to look the part, and one that they probably needed if they wanted to stay in the CFP race, they were able to get. Ohio State dominates Illinois 34-16, and this looks very modest compared to the Indiana score. I understand that. Ohio State rolled in this game. It was not even close from start to finish. The defense is an absolute nightmare. There's nothing that Illinois could do. It took them like 15 chances to get 1 yard, it felt like, on the goal line. It was ridiculous. It's insane to watch what this defense can do. Frankly, the reality of this team is the offense gives you 20 points, you're in really good shape. The defense is an absolute boa constrictor. There's nothing to be done against this defense in a lot of different cases. I think Davis and Igbinosun got away with a couple, if I'm being totally honest, but Arvell Reese is an absolute nightmare at the linebacker position, maybe the best linebacker in the country, as crazy as that sounds with how many great ones there are out there. Caleb Downs continues to be, in my opinion, the very best player in the entire country. It's ridiculous what this defense can do. It's ridiculous what Matt Patricia has been able to do, and what all of these players said. You know, you go back to last year, all of the talent on that defense, all of the guys that have played so much football on that defense. And now you look forward, I think these guys were just sitting on the sideline just getting pissed off. I think they just really wanted to be on the field. And now that they are, they're just laying out all of their frustration. And it comes at the detriment of guys like Luke Altmaier. But at the end of the day, Ohio State's going to be an absolute nightmare. They should very well be in the CFP moving forward. Illinois has kind of a manageable schedule. They have a bye and then they get a huge one against Washington State. They're a two-loss team with a lot of winnable games coming forward. I don't tend to believe they're going to make it to the CFP. I tend to believe they're going to lose at least one more, but this is a very interesting team moving forward that only lost to Ohio State and Indiana. I don't think that's a huge crime, but we'll see what happens with Illinois moving forward. Ohio State gets Wisconsin, Penn State, Purdue, UCLA, Rutgers, and Michigan. If they're not 11-0 going into Michigan, you got a big old problem over there in Columbus. I tend to believe they're going to be. And then you just got to see what happens there. You got to find a way to win that football game. I promise you we will get there and we'll talk about it plenty. But it's a very interesting time over there in Ohio State. They're rolling right along, and I don't think anyone has a real shot before Michigan. And I don't want to say that. I was going to say something. I'm going to leave it alone for the time being because it's gotten me in trouble the last couple of years. But Ole Miss escapes one against Washington State. This was a bad football game from Ole Miss, and it was all over the place from start to finish. Trinidad Chambliss was good enough. He made enough plays, especially with his legs in this game, but there was definitely a little bit of that, this is why the guy was the backup start coming into the season in this game. There's no doubt about that. So that's definitely something to watch. The biggest takeaway for me was this defense for Ole Miss is just not the same as it was a year ago, mainly on the defensive line. They're just not as physical. They don't have as many NFL guys up there, and Washington State was able to take advantage. If you get UGA this weekend and you don't get after Gunnar Stockton, he's going to tear you apart. Now, it might not be absolutely ridiculous, might not be 350 yards, but that offense will do a lot of damage to you if you do not get after that quarterback. There's a couple holes on this Ole Miss team that make me feel not super confident that they will, but Ole Miss was able to get the win at the very least. You're able to get the win. You move forward to UGA with a huge one. We'll see what happens with this football team. I am very on the fence about what this Ole Miss team can be. I still think they could make it to the CFP. I feel a whole lot less confident than I did before, and frankly, I didn't feel all that confident before, as weird as that sounds. Texas A&M dominates Florida 34-17. Texas A&M is the best team in the SEC. I don't think this really has to be said at this point for a lot of people, but at the end of the day, I think it's them, Alabama, maybe Ole Miss if you want to throw them in there. I wouldn't at this point, but at the end of the day, Texas A&M is the best team in the SEC. If they can run the football at that level, it's going to be really hard to stop this offense because Marcel Reed can make a number of big-time plays. A couple of things that he just continuing to force the ball at times into positions where you probably don't need to. But at the end of the day, very talented kid. The run game is absolutely ridiculous. It sounds like Le'Veon Moss is going to be okay. We'll see how that kind of develops over the next little bit. But at the end of the day, a lot of juice around that program, and there very well should be. A lot of energy. They get Arkansas, I believe, this weekend. And Florida. It's a weird football team, man. They score touchdowns on two of their first three drives. DJ Lagway looks the part. Everything is rolling downhill, and they just kind of fall flat. They just don't score the rest of the day. Now, a lot of that has to do with A&M and the pass rush that they were able to put together, but at the end of the day, I think it's over. I think we can all say that now. I think Billy Napier held on by a string after they beat Texas. I think it's over. I think it doesn't really matter what happens against Mississippi State this upcoming weekend. I think he's fired by the end of this weekend, if I'm being totally honest. And frankly, I think this team might be done. I think there's a lot of different moments where you're thinking maybe this team is officially like just mentally checked out, just can't handle the pressure, can't handle the ridiculous nature of what they're dealing with right now. I think this might have been it. I think this might have been the moment where a lot of players just said, I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore. I don't know how I'm supposed to continue to fight for a team that probably is not going to be here pretty soon. I think Mississippi State might win that game, and I think Florida is probably going to get rid of Billy Napier here pretty soon. Texas Tech is ridiculous in every sense of the word, and they're one of those teams that they're just not a normal Big 12 roster in a lot of different ways. It's a total mismatch. Their defensive line against every offensive line in the conference. It is an absolute mismatch from start to finish in these football games. Now, Utah was able to hold up a little bit better, which makes a little bit of sense, but they dominated this team, and they're going to dominate just about every team moving forward. If I'm being totally honest, Arizona State this weekend's a huge one, and obviously that's going to be a more even matchup, but this Texas Tech defensive line is too much. It's an absolutely dominating group. The offensive line is much of the same. I don't know how a Big 12 team beats this team. And that's definitely me speaking a little bit prematurely, but it's a ridiculous football team that's playing such high level. They're running the football incredibly efficiently. Baron Morton leaves this game, and it doesn't matter. They continue to roll on now. We'll see what happens moving forward. I think he's going to play against Arizona State. I think Will Hammond would be good enough, if I'm being totally honest. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens. If they beat Arizona State this weekend, it's really just BYU in their way of a 12-0 season and going to the Big 12 title. So it's a ridiculous team. Coming into the season, we knew it was really talented. They're also playing really together, and it's a terrifying sight for every other team in the Big 12. Tennessee wins the game 34-31 over Arkansas. This one looks a little bit closer than it was. Arkansas was down 17 with about 8 minutes left in this game, and then they were able to fight back into it. Now, they did have a shot to win this game. It's not to say that Arkansas couldn't have got the ball back late in this one and found a way to win it. So Tennessee's definitely towing a line there. There's no doubt about that. But they're in a position where I think they just weren't going to be able to fully get back in this game, at least if Tennessee was going to be able to run the football at the end of it, and they were. So I do think Tennessee kind of controlled this game, didn't quite do enough defensively to make you feel confident, especially going against an Alabama team here pretty soon. But Tennessee, you just got to hope you get back Gibson and McCoy. If you get back Jermon McCoy and Ricky Gibson, a lot of really good things can happen for this football team because it's not going to be an elite defense. That's something that should be said right now. This is not going to be elite defense. It's not even going to be a good defense, if I'm being totally honest. What it can be is opportunistic. What it can be is Tyree West and Joshua Josephs creating all types of havoc, and then Colton Hood, Ricky Gibson, and Jermon McCoy making plays on the back end. It's not going to be perfect, but if you find a way to get a turnover per game, if you find a way to get 2 turnovers this weekend from Ty Simpson, you can win a lot of football games. That's very much up for debate, and that's very much something that not a lot of teams can do efficiently or do consistently, I should say. We'll see if Tennessee can pull it off. It's definitely a little bit of a tightrope walk, but I think they have enough defensively and obviously have the firepower offensively to get the win this weekend. You're probably going to need Jermon McCoy and Ricky Gibson back to do it. So we'll see what happens going forward. Tennessee's still in the mix. I'm a little bit more questionable about the Vols going forward, especially if they don't get those guys healthy. Iowa State falls on the road at Colorado, and I'm going to say something I really never thought I would say. I think the Deion Sanders story is being under-talked about in college football. That sounds crazy. I understand that. There's a lot of Deion Sanders stories that might be talked about a little bit too much in the past. This one's incredible. This guy has gotten surgery after surgery. Before the year, in the middle of the year, this week, he got a surgery, and he still coaches on the weekend. He still wants to be around these players. He still finds a way to get back to practice in some cases. There's a lot of people in college football that like what they do. There's a lot of people in college football that enjoy this, that want to be around this sport. There's very few that like it more than Deion Sanders, and there's a lot of people that would tell you differently. This guy loves what he does. He loves his kids. He loves his players. I don't know what the future holds for him. I don't know if he's going to stick around. I don't know if he should stick around at Colorado with all of the health issues that he has going on. At the end of the day, when we lose Deion Sanders from the sidelines of college football, it is going to be a sad day. That is a special person. That is a guy that cares about his team, and I know a lot of people turn their nose up at that, but there are a lot of coaches that I don't want to say don't care. That's not fair. There are a lot of coaches that care with all of their heart about the kids that they have on their roster. Deion Sanders is at the very top of that list to me. An incredible, incredible man, a man that goes through more on a weekly basis than all of us could probably imagine. And he finds a way to coach a football team every Saturday, and this one to a win over a top 25 team. Incredible. It's something that does not get talked about nearly enough throughout the season. I'm going to continue talking about it. If he's still on that sideline, he's still coaching teams even to a win or a loss. He deserves all types of credit because it's a ridiculously hard thing to do. But Iowa State, your hopes are on life support. I think that's understood around there right now. They get a bye, and then they get BYU, Arizona State, TCU. You win all of those, you're still firmly in the mix. You lose all of them, or you lose even one of them, you're probably out of this thing. But they're absolutely a team that can make something happen. Still a very special team. I think Matt Campbell might be heading somewhere else here pretty soon, but we'll see what happens with that. Obviously, a lot of jobs that will still come open. Colorado won't be elite this year, but they're really going to fight. It's really fun to watch this team. They get a bye, and then they get Utah. We'll see what happens. Just felt like it needed to be talked about. What Deion Sanders is going through on a daily basis and still being able to coach this team to a win is absolutely ridiculous, and it's the epitome of what college football is meant to be. A guy that loves his team, that loves his players, and goes out there every weekend not feeling 100% and finds a way to get it done. Pitt gets a win over Florida State 34-31. Does anyone want to try to explain to me what happened against Florida State and Alabama? Because that's not the same football team. I'm telling you right now. This is not one of those things where you're thinking, maybe Alabama's just not very good and Florida State just ran into better teams the rest of the way. That's not what happened. I'm just being totally honest with you. I don't think Pitt's as good as Alabama. I don't think Virginia's as good as Alabama. I think Florida State's not playing very good football, and I think they played really good football on that Saturday, the first week of the season. I don't know what happened. Here's the other thing that I want to say here. Florida State went 2-10 last year. I don't think that fully got the scope of how bad things were there. As crazy as that sounds, I don't think people fully understand the hole that Mike Norvell was digging himself out of. Here's the other reality of that. When you beat Alabama, everything changes. When you win that game in week 1, everything changes. Everyone starts looking at you as an ACC title contender, as someone that can make the CFP right after a 2-10 season. If you had told me coming into the year that Florida State was 3-3 after 6 weeks, I would have said, okay, that makes sense. They lost to Alabama, they lost to Miami, they lost to Pitt. That's okay. That's not ideal, but at the very least, if you're fighting in those games, you're playing good football. And they're fighting in these games. But when you beat Alabama, everything changes. So I don't know what to make of the season. I really don't. Going into the season, I would have said this is more than fine. After they beat Alabama, I would have said this was disaster. So I really don't know what to make of this. I don't know what to make of Mike Norvell's future over there in Tallahassee. I think he has enough equity build-up to get through this season. I think they got to get to 6-6, and I tend to believe they will. It's just one of those things where I don't know what to make of this Florida State team. I don't know how disappointed to be. I don't know how encouraged to be, because this is where I thought they would be in the preseason through 6 weeks, which is not the way I thought it would go down. So I'm really confused about what this team is going forward. I don't know what Mike Norvell's future holds. I tend to believe they'll get to a bowl game, and that'll be enough. I can't imagine Florida State fans will be too excited about that after the start to the season that they had. And then we just got to give some love to UCLA. The story continues. I don't know how, but they continue to win football games. And that offense is really good. It's just really, really, really solid. And obviously, Jerry Neuheisel getting a lot of love. Tim Skipper has done an incredible job with his football team as well. But this offense is a difference maker. And it's one of those offenses that, obviously, against the Ohio States and the Oregons and the Indianas of the world, they're not going to play as good and as efficient football. They can do it against just about everyone else. They get Maryland this upcoming weekend at home. They can win that football game. There's no doubt about that. They can move to 3-4. I don't think they're going to make a bowl game at the end of this because they get Indiana, Nebraska, Ohio State, Washington, and USC after that. So it's not going to get easier if you're UCLA, but at least this is a very fun run. Incredible job by what Tim Skipper and Jerry Neuheisel have been able to do. Just a weird team. One of those teams that pops up every year in college football where you don't know what happened. Well, you know what happened in this case, but something flips in that team and they just start playing really elite football. So incredible job by those two coaches, and we'll see what happens the rest of the way. Maybe they're the team that totally throws a wrench into Nebraska or Indiana or Washington or USC by the end of the year. I don't think they're going to do that to Ohio State, but we'll see what happens with the Bruins going forward. One of the best stories in the country, and I don't think it's going anywhere, at least on the offensive side of the ball. And then a little group of 6 scoreboard. Tulane gets a win by 7 points over East Carolina, one they badly needed if they wanted to stay in the American race. UNLV and Air Force played one of the weirder games that we've seen, 51-48 in favor of the running Rebels, one they badly needed as well. Marshall beating Old Dominion, dominating Old Dominion 48-24, probably knocks out Old Dominion from the group of 5 CFP talk. They were right kind of in that mix, probably dominating the Sun Belt would have to do it, but they're not going to be able to do that anymore. So that's a huge win for Marshall, one that kind of probably takes the Sun Belt out of the conversation. JMU's still in it, but probably knocks them out of the conversation, puts the American kind of on the forefront. Navy gets a win over Temple in dramatic fashion, and Blake Horvath probably had to answer to his mother at the end of that one. A little bit of a curse word at the end of that one, but an incredible performance by him. Troy comes back to beat Texas State in overtime, an incredible game there. Boise State gets a win to keep them in the mix for the Mountain West, but a little bit worried about that team going forward. South Dakota State is a team that a lot of people need to pay more attention to. They're playing really good football. Sean Lewis, the coordinator from Oregon or from Colorado that went over there, has done an incredible job there, and maybe they're the team at the end of all this that's standing upright. But an incredible weekend in the group of 6 and a lot of things that continue to happen over the next couple of weeks. But this was an awesome weekend. There was a lot of things that happened this weekend. Obviously, the firing of James Franklin kind of takes the cake there, but Indiana puts on a performance that they badly needed. Texas gets off the mat against Oklahoma. You have Alabama get a massive win on the road with another massive one against Tennessee here coming up. So this one's going to get weird. That's something I want to say before I get out of here. A quick PSA to college football fans. It's going to get really messy. And it's going to get really messy in a hurry. There's a lot of different things that are going to happen both on the football field and off of it over the next couple of weeks that are going to be weird. There's going to be coaching changes that you do not expect. There's going to be games every single week that you do not expect to be close that are really close. The SEC is not going to make any sense. The Big Ten, I'm sure, will have some twists and turns to it. The Big 12 and the ACC have those dominating teams, but how great are those teams when they go up against an SEC or a Big Ten type team? We won't know until the end of the year. It's going to get weird. And the biggest thing to keep in mind here, if your football team plays on Saturday and they find a way to win, don't be mad. I don't care what the score is. I don't care what the context of the football game is. If they win by 1 point, if they win by 65 points, it does not matter. It is going to be really hard to win on Saturdays going forward in this sport. It's going to be really hard to find a way to get through the season unscathed. If you find a way to do it, if your team finds a way to win, take it and sprint the other direction because it is going to get really messy for a lot of football teams. Some teams that are playing incredible football right now won't finish in the CFP. Some teams that are not playing incredible football will find their way into the dance. It is going to get weird. It's going to get crazy. There's going to be a number of job openings that maybe you expect, maybe you don't expect going forward. All that to say, enjoy your Saturdays. Find a way. If your team finds a way to win, enjoy it, take it, run the other direction, and hope that your coach sticks around at the end of this year. It is going to get weird. It's going to get messy. Just settle in. Strap in just a little bit. It's going to get weird, and we'll have to find a way to see what the end of the season looks like at the end of this. But I have to imagine there's a couple of teams that are undefeated right now that are not going to end the season even with less than 2 losses. I think there's teams with 2 losses right now that could find their way to the CFP and everything in between. Just settle in. Hope that your team wins every Saturday. If they do, take it. Be okay with that no matter how you got it. But an incredible weekend on the docket. We got some huge games that will totally define the CFP conversation going forward. And I have to imagine those will go a little bit weird as well, and maybe a couple other coach firings to talk about. But we'll be back on Thursday to talk about all the games coming up. We'll break them all down. We'll get into maybe some other headlines that have come up over the next couple of days. But thank you so much for tuning in to Just Another College Football Podcast. Please do like, subscribe, comment, do all of that stuff. It means the world to me. It does help me out a ton over here. But thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you guys on Thursday to break down a ridiculous Week 8 slate.